Hello, I'm Charles Kovess, Australasia's passion provocateur. Welcome to this week's episode of The Charles Kovess Show, whether you're watching on Rumble or on YouTube or listening via one of the many podcast platforms. This is episode 196 of this almost weekly program that's now been going for over 4 years. We remind you that we have a new format for the show. The show is somewhat shorter now because we're so bombarded with information, and the structure of the show now comprises me discussing 3 or 4 big issues that have arisen during the week rather than one big idea, and then I will share such resources that are relevant to those topics that I choose to discuss. The foundational principles of the show are not changing. The show notes now give you links to my background and the foundational principles of the show, and links to my websites where there are many resources, including links to buy my books Passionate People Produce and Passionate Performance. So let's go with this week's big impact issues and how you might handle them, react to them in an elegant and effective way in your life. You do that by applying the self-awareness and passion principles to these issues. Firstly, the mainstream media fraud and the fear porn that it peddles is a matter of significant concern that has an impact on your life if you are not careful. I spoke last night at a book launch, and I'll tell you about the book a little bit later in this show, and I was discussing the fear porn that is peddled and the impact it has on your thinking, the impact it has on your feeling about life. Mainstream media has always peddled bad news, but it's becoming ever less trustworthy. The numbers that you could take into account is that mainstream media is losing money hand over fist because it's not attracting the eyeballs. My assessment from all the information available to me is that about 30% of people are observing mainstream media. 70% of people are getting information from a wide variety of different sources. But those different sources are covering all sorts of different matters. The mainstream media gets its power because it focuses on a narrow number of issues that are part of a hidden agenda. That's a psychological operation that's being literally imposed on humanity by people who decide this is what the mainstream media will cover. The mainstream media censors news literally if it doesn't comply with that narrative. Now, does government want you to be feeling confident and happy and powerful, or does it want you to need security? And I say it's the latter. Government does not want you to be powerful. Government wants to be powerful. And so it supports the fear porn narrative. And if you immerse yourself into this fear porn, you will become ever more worried about what's happening. You will become disempowered rather than powerful. When we're feeling weak, that's when we want some comfort. That's when we want some security. And the danger then is that we are too willing to give away our freedoms. Oh yes, the government will look after us. I have ceased to have any trust in government. It is not to be trusted. It has so abused its trust, it has lost my trust and that of many, many people. In fact, surveys published all around the world say that governments have never been less trustworthy in the West than they are now. Governments and politicians do not deserve your trust, broadly speaking. There are some individual politicians who certainly do. So how do you deal with this problem? The answer is you become more aware of the need to be careful, to be discerning about where you get your information. To give you one example, when you look at any media source, you look back at your experience around that media source and you make that decision at the start. Am I going to accept whatever this media tells me? I urge you to look at the overall layout of the media that's being presented to you. So whether it's a newspaper, for example, many people read newspapers online rather than getting the physical newspaper. Now, I buy a physical copy of The Australian every day that's published. That's the Murdoch Press from News Limited in Australia, and I have been collecting these hard copy newspapers ever since the start of the imposed lockdowns of February, March 2020. Now, I'm collecting these physical newspapers as evidence, but I have this mainstream media news because I want to know what the mainstream media is saying so I can report on it to you in this show and in various shows that I do, in various conversations that I have. And I look at the whole layout of the Australian newspaper to see what it's focusing on, what the big articles are, what's being ignored. So I look at it in a very discerning eye, and I don't believe anything that I read in that newspaper. I withhold my belief until I look at a number of different sources. So the message here is to be super mindful of where you are absorbing information. And that mindfulness helps your self-awareness skills. And this show is about helping you to constantly increase your self-awareness so that you become more and more aware of what makes you tick. At the book launch, I was talking last night about our beliefs. And our beliefs, in fact, they determine the way that we absorb news. If you don't believe something exists, then when it's published, you won't even notice that it's published. So this awareness around beliefs is such a crucial element in terms of you enjoying your life. So I urge you to keep reviewing what you believe. And if you don't know what you believe, then you say, I don't know what I believe about this, and that's a great space to be in. Or don't fall into the trap of just believing what other people believe. Now, I know you know that, but I'm reminding you to make yourself consciously aware to say, gosh, am I imposing an adopted belief from somewhere on this piece of news? The second element around this news issue is to focus on how you react to given pieces of news. How do you react to what's happening in Israel and Gaza? How do you react? Do you react with anger, with excitement, with frustration, with sadness to a given piece of news about the Ukraine? In the news last week was this resolution by the US Congress to give $95 billion to in an omnibus bill, the vast majority of that money to Ukraine. Now you think about what happens to some 60 plus billion out of that 95 billion that's allegedly going to support the Ukraine. Not 1 cent of that is going to the Ukraine. That's all going to US arms manufacturers. So the 60 billion said to be for Ukraine goes to these weapons manufacturers in the US. Okay? And where is that money coming from? Well, taxpayers, or it's being borrowed. They're the only two sources. So as you observe your reaction to each piece of news, it helps you analyse who you are, what you believe. You go, gosh, my anger response is coming about because these are the links that I'm making as a consequence of reading that piece of news. Whenever I read the news, I constantly get new ideas for problem-solving opportunities. And so in the context of this show, and what you're meant to be doing in life, there are so many problems to solve. How can anyone say there's no opportunities? Every problem is an opportunity for you to say, I want to use my unique skills, my unique passion to solve that problem. So one of the ways to read the news, and from any source, is to go, gosh, that's a nice problem I would like to solve. That's a horrendous problem I would like to solve. Or that's something enjoyable I would like to bring to the attention of certain people. And one way I do this is I was in a taxi in Sydney on Tuesday night. Went to Sydney for a 2-day agricultural conference focused on hemp. And the taxi driver was an Indian guy who'd been driving taxis for some years. And, you know, I asked him what he does, and we had a bit of a chat, and he asked me, where are the business opportunities? And he was open to doing whatever. And I said to him, gosh, if you are good at selling and you love selling, if you love marketing, the whole world is your oyster, because you can go into any field. You don't have to be expert in it. You become expert, you become knowledgeable about it, and you are able to earn a living by helping enterprises that have good solutions to market and sell those solutions. So coming back to the news, when you read the news, when you get a piece of news, it creates opportunities in my mind. And I'm inviting you to think about what opportunities it might create for you when you pursue what's of interest to you in those news articles. One other point on news. The Australian government is trying to attack anyone who's peddling misinformation and disinformation. It's a fraud, and I'm pushing back hard against it, and I urge you to push back against it as well, because to give you one example of the complexity of what is misinformation, what is disinformation. Now, if I said that you are a rapist, that is misinformation, because if you're not a rapist, that's misinformation. But it gets very complicated very quickly. And in the early days of the use of the term fake news, I was having a conversation with a number of business colleagues. There were some 20 of us. I was moderating for 8 years a monthly meeting. The group was called Rhodium because it's the 45th element in the periodic table, and it's a rare earth. 45th or the 12th, can't quite remember, doesn't matter. But all of these people were experienced consultants, and I said, so what is fake news? Or, if you couldn't answer that question, where do you get your source of news? And within those 20 people, we had a long conversation, and nobody could agree on where is one reliable source of information. So the message is to be willing to invest your time in looking at lots of sources of information if you want to come to a belief about a situation. And then secondly, suspend your belief. Do not let a comment made in the mainstream media to create your belief. In my view, that is a losing strategy. The third element of mainstream media that I bring to your attention is the story of a freedom warrior like me, Nick Patterson, who has a Telegram channel called Fight Corrupt Police. Now, 3 years ago, he was wrongly assaulted, attacked, injured, jailed by the Victoria Police when he came to the aid of one of his friends who was being assaulted by the Victoria Police. Mainstream media, when he was arrested and put into jail for 29 days without conviction, mainstream media gave it a lot of media. This week, the police dropped the charges. The judge held, in fact, that the police statements were full of lies, full of mistruths, and the charges against Nick Patterson were dropped. Guess how much mainstream media coverage there was? Nil. And that's the fraud of mainstream media. So the message is to be constantly vigilant, and to show how important this is, think about an area about which you know a lot that might be covered in the media. I've found this to be true all the time. I know a lot about industrial hemp. The media coverage, mainstream media coverage on industrial hemp, when it's run, it's a tiny little part of the story. It can be a misleading part of the story. It can be a censored part of the story. In any area that I know well, the mainstream media covers it pretty badly. And then what happens, there's a particular name for this syndrome, I haven't had a chance to research it, is if you know nothing about a topic and you read it in the mainstream media, then you come with the assumption that it's true. That's what I'm warning you against. Nick Patterson's story is a wonderful example of standing up for what is right, what is true, what is fair, what is lawful, and it's a disgrace that the mainstream media has given it no coverage. Full credit to Avi Yemeni from Rebel News for giving it that coverage. Now, the second last item is the book launch. I said I would mention it. It's a book called Lighter. Lovely cover. You can see it. Lighter by two highly skilled and talented ladies, Karen Foote and Michelle Scher. I reviewed the book. My review is published in the book, but the launch was on Friday night, the 3rd of May in Melbourne. And this book is a wonderful resource in terms of your self-identity, in terms of your health, in terms of weight loss, in terms of feeling lighter about yourself. And one of the statements that I made at the end of my speech was that I said, why can angels fly? Because they take themselves lightly. There's a real benefit in lightening up. Hey, don't take everything so seriously. And if you take my advice here and don't get seduced by mainstream media, you will immediately feel lighter. Lastly, my TNT guest on the Mind Medicine program this week is Vincent Ming. He has written a book called Getting Into the Flow, and it's about structured intuition. Listen on tntradio.live at 6 p.m, or all of the episodes of these shows are available as podcasts. Vincent, I love the idea of structured intuition. That's why I'm interviewing him. And his book is available at vincentming.com. So they're the two resources this week. The book Lighter by Karen Foote and Michelle Scher. And then Vincent Ming's book, Getting Into the Flow. So, I hope today's show makes a beneficial difference in your life. A life that I believe is meant to be all that you are capable of making of it. And your belief system, the food that you put into your mind, your thinking process, is the way that you create your life. If you are new to the show, check out the links for the foundational principles of the show and background about me, and also the links to my websites. My books are available at those websites, plus a bunch of resources. Again, thanks for watching or listening. And until our next show, may your week be full of energy-giving and health-giving passion, learning, fun, fulfillment, and challenges that help you on your growing journey. It is learn and grow or die. I want you to learn and grow. Have a great week. See you next week. Bye.